Hello everyone, welcome to VCIA training course. In this course, I will introduce you VSOL PON products, basic operation and configuration. Upon completion of this course, you will be able to know how to use VSOL PON products. There are 4 parts of this course. Part 1, Topology and Management, mainly introduce application of PON products, how to connect cable and fiber, and how to manage. Part 2, OLT Basic Operation, mainly introduce OLT IP configuration, user management, system log, upgrade, configuration file, and system time. Part 3, ONU Basic Operation, mainly introduce ONU authentication, query ONU status, and upgrade. Part 4, Service Configuration, mainly introduce how to configure basic services. Now we start Part 1, Topology and Management. PON products belong to access network devices, which connect end users and service providers to achieve Internet, IPTV, voice, and other services. It includes FTTH, FTTB, FTTC, and so on. VSOL products can also be used for online meeting and video surveillance. Take FTTH as an example. The user device connects to the ONU, and ONU, ODN, OLT transmit data between user devices and access switch. In the network, we can deploy management platform for VSOL PON products. Although the various applications of the PON products, the connection is very simple. No matter EPON, SPON, or SGSPON, the connection is the same. We should use proper PON module to insert in OLT PON ports. If PON module doesn't match the PON port, ONU may not register and work normally. On the label of the PON module, you can see what kind of PON it is. The uplink port of OLT connects to router or switch for services access. Connect the main fiber of splitter to PON module and connect ONU to the branch fiber. There are different types of ONU user ports. Connect correct devices to them. For example, connect PC to LAN port, connect telephone to POTS port. After connected cable and fiber, how to manage and configure. This is what I want to talk now. Classified by management interface type, there are GUI mode and CLI mode. Web and EMS use GUI interface. Console and Telnet, or SSH, use CLI interface. Classified by management port, there are serial port mode, out-band mode, and in-band mode. With different management ports, advantages and disadvantages are different too. For console management, we operate and maintain OLT by commands. Get more information that other ports can't, but it's not convenient for remote management. For out-band management, we operate and maintain OLT by GUI or CLI. It provides more reliable but separated maintenance channel. For in-band management, we operate and maintain OLT by GUI or CLI. It provides flexible maintenance network without additional devices. But we can't perform maintenance when service channel is faulty. Next, I introduce the 3 management ways. Firstly, manage by console. Connect a serial cable to the console port, run PuTTY or other serial port tools, and set the parameters. The parameters of serial port are showing on this picture. The actual serial port number depends on the computer. You can query in Device Manager of the computer. If the computer doesn't have serial port, you need an USB to serial cable. Secondly, manage by auxiliary port. It's called outband management. Auxiliary port is an Ethernet port. Connect a network cable to auxiliary port and configure a same subnet IP address for computer. Then you can access OLT by HTTPS or Telnet, SSH or SNMP. The default IP address of OLT is 192.168.8.100 for EPON and .200 for JPON or ESCSPON. The computer can connect to auxiliary port through a switch. By default, OLT blocks Telnet and SNMP and enables SSH2. Thirdly, manage by uplink port. It's called in-band management. In-band management uses service port to manage OLT. The management IP is configured for service VLAN or separated management VLAN. In next part, I will introduce how to configure management IP. Usually the computer connects to uplink port through switches or routers. In this course, I will only show you OLT management by web page. Part 2, OLT Basic Operation. In this part, I will introduce some OLT basic operations. Management IP configuration. I just introduced that outband management uses auxiliary port. You can modify its IP address as your demand. Usually, auxiliary port is only used for local management. Just connect the management computer to it directly. But sometimes you want to connect it to network, access OLT through Layer 3 network. You need to configure gateway for it. Delete the gateway configuration, input 0.0.0.0 and submit. For in-band management, you need to create VLAN first, or use existing service VLAN. Configure VLAN port so that you can access the VLAN through the uplink port. VLAN mode depends on the port of the device it connected with. They should be the same VLAN mode. PVID should be configured only when VLAN is untag mode and the value is the same as VLAN ID. After created VLAN, configure IP for the VLAN. If using service VLAN for management, usually the IP is the same subnet as service IP address. Need to configure gateway on static root page when accessing OLT through Layer 3 network. Destination IP and mask all R0 stands for any destination network. It's also called default route. You can also configure other specified destination network. OLT login user management. If there are some technicians need to maintain the OLT, you can create different login users for them. The username must begin with letter, must contain at least 6 characters, and at least 2 types of characters. There are 2 kinds of roles, admin and normal. Admin level user has all rights to operate OLT, and normal level user only has rights to show information and configurations. If want to change login password or user role, you can edit the existing users. Click Edit icon of one username in the user table. Input new password in Edit text box. Select user role that the username belongs to. This is optional. Role of the default user can't be changed. Click Edit button to complete password change. Admin user can change all other users' password, but normal user can only change its own password. To delete user, just click Delete icon of one username in the user table and confirm to delete the user on the pop-up box. The default user can't be deleted. System log table displays OLT and ONU alarms and OLT system operation logs. From the logs, you can know what happened to OLT or ONU. You can set maximum log entry of the table and query logs based on different alarm type. If don't want some kinds of log to display on specified terminal, you can disable them. There are 4 options for each alarm. Print. Alarm and event show in console and telnet, but not show in syslog, EMS, and remote log server. Record. Alarm and event show in syslog, but not show in console, telnet, EMS, and remote log server. Trap. Alarm and event show in EMS, but not show in console, telnet, syslog, and remote log server. Remote. Alarm and event show in remote log server, but not show in console, telnet, syslog, and EMS. You can also set threshold of OLT alarms. Upgrade OLT firmware. In the following situations, you may need to upgrade firmware. In order to get new features or functions. In order to fix some bugs. Upgrade steps. Step 1. Choose correct firmware file and click Upgrade button. Step 2. Wait until it shows success and prompts reboot. Step 3. Reboot OLT. Please notice that you should follow the instructions provided with the firmware. Reboot OLT. Click the Reboot button to reboot OLT without turning power off and on. Configuration management. For security of the configurations, you'd better backup it. Click Download button to backup the configurations to a computer. When need to restore old configurations or the old OLT is replaced by a new one, use Restore Configuration function to configure quickly. Only the config file backed up from the same model can be restored to another. Click Load button to restore configurations to factory default. Click Save button to save current configurations to flash memory so that the configurations don't get lost after OLT reboot or power off. Every time you change the configuration, you should save it. System time configuration. OLT needs clock signal to make the system work normally, and the system records log with the time. So exact time can also help us to know what time the operation or alarm occurs. Since there is no battery in OLT, the time will reset to default after power is turned off. In this case, NTP configuration is necessary. NTP server can be an IP address or a domain name. If NTP server is domain name, you need to configure DNS server. DNS, Domain Name System, server, is used to resolute domain name in Internet. Make sure the DNS server is reachable so that it can resolute domain successfully. Port mirror is usually used for troubleshooting. Mirror traffic of one port to another so that we can capture by Wireshark. OLT supports single direction traffic mirror, and both directions traffic mirror, supports multiple source ports mirror. OLT support 4 mirror sessions. But usually, we only mirror both direction traffic of single port. Login management. I told that OLT blocks Telnet and SNMP by default. If you want to Telnet or use EMS, you need to configure this login access list. You can configure access rules as you demands. Source IP and mask all are 0 means that all IP addresses match the rules. Sometimes, in order to improve security level, we don't want to use default service ports. We can change the ports of Web, Telnet, SSH, and SNMP service ports. Web access will log out automatically in specified time without any operation. You can change the expires time. By default, it's 5 minutes. Verification code on login page is optional. For security, don't set a long expires time and don't disable verification code. Part 3, ONU Basic Operation. In this part, I will introduce some ONU basic operations. ONU is short for Optical Network Unit. It's end device of access network. ONU must work with OLT together. The ONU can receive data from OLT and provide various service types for user terminals only after the ONU is successfully added to the OLT and goes online. EPON OLT manage ONU by OAM and CHPON ESCSPON OLT manage ONU by OMCI. There are 2 types of ONU, SFU and HGU. SFU is Layer 2 device and HGU is Layer 3 device, which also can work on bridge mode. Before using services, ONU should be added to OLT and authorized. There are some differences between EPON and CHPON or XGS-PON. Generally, ONU mainly uses MAC, SN, and LOID for authentication. MAC authentication is only used for EPON, and SN authentication is only used for CHPON, ESCSPON. LOID can be used for all of them. If authentication mode is disabled or auto-learn is enabled, ONU will be authenticated automatically. Otherwise, we need to add the ONU into whitelist. Before authenticated, ONU will display on discovery page. You need to add it into whitelist or authenticate it manually. After added ONU, you can query ONU information on offlist page, including online status, register info and phase, optical info, version info, ONU capability, and so on. You can also do operations and configure ONU in this table. In the first column of ONU list table, ONU ID displays PON port ID and ONU ID. If it requires ONU ID on other pages, such as ONU upgrade, the ONU ID should not contain PON port ID. Sometimes, we need to upgrade ONU, but they are installed at clients' houses. So we can upgrade them by OLT. There are two ways to upgrade: manual upgrade and auto upgrade. For JPON, need to upload ONU firmware to OLT memory first. You can see the firmware size after finished uploading. Then select the firmware in the list and PON port, input ONU ID and select Upgrade Mode. There are several steps to upgrade an ONU. First, download firmware from OLT to ONU. Second, activate the firmware. ONU will reboot with the new firmware. Third, commit the new firmware so that ONU will use it every time it reboots. Usually, we always choose Mix Mode, which includes above 3 steps. We can upgrade one or multiple ONU of the same model under one PON port at a time. For EPON, only one page for ONU upgrade. Select PON and ONU, then upload firmware and upgrade. Auto upgrade, just as its name implies, ONU will upgrade automatically when they come online. We need to configure auto upgrade conditions. Fill ONU equipment ID or vendor ID, model ID, and the new firmware version. For JPON, need to upload firmware to OLT first. For EPON, auto upgrade condition supports OUI. If the ONU current version is not the same as that configured in auto upgrade, OLT will upgrade the ONU. Please note that if the selected firmware version is not the same as that configured in auto upgrade, OLT will upgrade the ONU again and again. OLT will show upgrade status on web. You can do other things when upgrading. Offline ONU will not be upgraded. Only if it matches auto upgrade conditions, it will be upgraded when it comes online. Part 4. Service Configuration. In this part, I will introduce how to configure basic services. The configuration of EPON and JPON or SGSPON is different, but the basic configuration steps of the three services, Internet, IPTV, and VoIP, are similar. Step 1. We need to create VLAN and configure VLAN for ports. Generally, different service uses different VLAN. So the first thing is to configure VLAN. Step 2. Configure DBA profile. DBA is short for Dynamic Bandwidth Assignment. It defines the JPON upstream traffic parameters and controls the upstream traffic by binding the DBA profile. For EPON, DBA profile is optional, only need to configure when using traffic limit. Step 3. Configure traffic profile. Traffic profile defines the JPON traffic parameters and controls the GEMPort upstream and downstream traffic by binding the traffic profile. For EPON, no such profile. Step 4. Configure JPON parameters. It contains TCONT, GEMPort, service, service port, and port VLAN. For EPON, don't need to configure. Step 5. Configure long VLAN or WAN. For SFU type ONU, we can configure its LAN port directly. For HGU type ONU, we can't configure long VLAN, but need to configure WAN. Step 6. Configure others, such as IGMP for IPTV service, SIP parameters for VoIP service. Next, I will introduce these configurations. VLAN configuration. You can create one VLAN or VLAN range at a time. After created VLAN, need to configure port VLAN mode. PON ports are transparent mode, don't need to configure, but EPON ports need. Usually, we only select tag or untag mode, keep others being default. Tag mode. The traffic is transmitted with VLAN ID. It means the device connected with the port must configure tag mode too. Untag mode. The traffic is transmitted without VLAN ID. The device connected with the port must configure untag mode too. When configured untag mode for the ports, you need to configure its PVID, which is the same as the untag VLAN ID. DBA profile. There are two default DBA profiles with different types. When the default DBA profile can't meet the service requirement, you may need to add a new profile. There are 5 types of DBA profile. They have different parameters need to be configured. Fixed bandwidth is assigned to the ONU and can't be assigned to another, even the ONU doesn't use it. Assured bandwidth is to ensure that the corresponding bandwidth is assigned to the ONU. If the ONU doesn't have traffic, this part of bandwidth can be assigned to other ONUs. Maximum is the maximum bandwidth that the ONU can reach. Usually, we use DBA Type 2 and Type 3. Traffic profile is used for speed limit. In traffic profile, you need to set CIR and PIR at least. CBS and PBS use default value. Leave them blank. CIR. Committed information rate, the transmission rate won't be less than this value. PIR. Peak information rate, the maximum transmission rate. CBS. Committed burst size. Its committed burst bytes. PBS. Peak burst size. Its peak burst bytes. In order to establish data channel, these PON parameters must be configured. 1. TCONT. Fill TCONT ID and TCONT name, select an DBA profile that has been configured. Then click Commit button. OLT will fill the TCONT ID and TCONT name automatically if you don't fill. 2. Gemport. Fill Gemport ID and name, select the TCONT ID and traffic profile that has been configured. Keep others being default. Then click Commit button. OLT will fill the Gemport ID and Gemport name automatically if you don't fill. Use default traffic profile if you don't select. 3. Service. Fill the service name, select the correct Gemport ID and VLAN mode. If configured VLAN in ONU, the VLAN mode here should be tag, and fill correct VLAN ID. If didn't configure VLAN in ONU, the VLAN mode here should be untag. Usually, VLAN mode uses tag mode. 4. Service port. Select proper service mapping mode and Gemport, fill the VLAN. CVLAN range transparent, and untagged mode are the most commonly used for services. When choose CVLAN, there are at least 2 VLAN ID need to be set, user VLAN and translate VLAN. User VLAN and translate VLAN are the same indicates single VLAN is used. They are not the same indicates VLAN translation is used. Translate S VLAN is set indicates Q in queue is used. If didn't configure VLAN in ONU, service mode should be untagged. But you also need to set translate VLAN, which is only used in the OLT. For HGU type ONU, you can't configure its long port VLAN directly, but need to configure VEIP on port VLAN page. VEIP is Virtual Ethernet Port. One ONU has one VEIP, just configure VEIP1 transparent mode. For SFU type ONU, you can configure its long port VLAN directly. Usually, configure it tag mode and set the port ID and VLAN ID. In different scenario, you may use other modes, such as trunk. For IPTV service, you also need to configure IGMP or multicast. There is difference between PON, XGS, PON, and EPON. I will introduce later. All above are basic configurations for PON data channel. For HGU type ONU, WAN configuration can't be forgotten. For EPON, just configure WAN after VLAN is configured. Create a new root mode WAN, choose the correct parameters and fill the correct value, bind the ports. The service mode must be or contain Internet. After created the WAN, it will display in the running config table. You need to submit it again to send the configuration to the ONU. When the WAN takes effect and gets IP address, the WAN status will show connected. For IPTV service, you may need to configure a bridge mode WAN, service mode is other. For VoIP service, it's the same way to configure WAN, which the service mode should be VoIP. Next, I introduce how to configure IPTV service. IPTV uses multicast function. For SFU type ONU, need to configure multicast VLAN for long port and configure strip mode. For GPON, multicast VLAN is global configuration, and for EPON, it's based on long port. Except ONU, we also need to configure IGMP for OLT. Enable OLT IGMP, General Query Packet function, keep others being default. However, you can also change the query source IP and others if you need. Remember that the query source IP is not multicast IP, but it is unicast IP of OLT. Then configure port user VLAN. Select the PON port, user VLAN, and group VLAN. If there is no special request, they use the same VLAN ID. IGMP join message, leave message, and query message use the user VLAN. IGMP traffic uses group VLAN. After configured multicast user VLAN, the port can receive IGMP join and leave message. At last, configure multicast router port. Multicast router port can transfer IGMP messages. You need to configure the uplink port which connects with multicast source as multicast router port. The VLAN ID is group VLAN. That's all for IPTV configuration. Finally, I introduce VoIP configuration. Before configuring SIP information, you need to complete all basic data channel configurations in previous introduction. Then configure SIP server and account. The SIP account must register to SIP server before using VoIP service. The server information is provided by ISP. There may be several servers in a big service provider, but we usually only need to configure proxy server and register server, keep others being default, or follow the ISP's request. If there is only one server, configure proxy server and register server the same address. The SIP account contains phone number, username, and password. Username and password are used for authentication in SIP server. They may be different from the phone number. After registered to SIP server, the port status will display idle. Then you can use VoIP service. It's not a different thing to configure these, right? Till now, I introduced how to configure Internet, IPTV, and VoIP service. But if there are hundreds and thousands of ONU, do we still need to configure them one by one? No, you don't. If many ONUs have the same configurations, in order to improve efficiency, you can configure them by profiles. We take Internet service as an example. For all the ONUs, they can use the same line profile. Service profiles are different between HGU and SFU. Private profile is only used for VSOL HGU. For one configuration, if the IP mode is DHCP and other parameters are the same, you can configure them by profile. But if the IP mode is static or PPPoE, you need to configure them individually. Just refer to above basic configuration. Firstly, I introduce profile configuration for PON. ONU profile defines capability of ONU. You can fill in UNI ports type and number according to the actual ONU, keeps others being default. DBA profile and traffic profile are mentioned above. I mainly introduce line profile and service profile here. Add a line profile and click Detail and Modify to edit parameters. The rest configuration is the same as that I talked before. First, configure TCONT and bind in DBA profile for upstream traffic. Second, configure Gemport. Set the parameters that marked in red box, keep others being default, and bind traffic profile for upstream and downstream traffic. Third, configure service. Choose correct Gemport ID and VLAN mode. If configured VLAN in ONU, the VLAN mode here should be tag and fill correct VLAN ID. If didn't configure VLAN in ONU, the VLAN mode here should be untag. Fourth, configure service port. Choose proper service mapping mode and Gemport, fill in the VLAN. CVLAN range transparent, and untagged mode are the most commonly used for services. User VLAN and translate VLAN are the same, indicates single VLAN is used. They are not the same, indicates VLAN translation is used. If translate S VLAN is set, indicates Q in queue is used. If didn't configure VLAN in ONU, service mode should be untagged. But you also need to set translate VLAN which is only used in the OLT. Add a service profile and click Detail and Modify to edit parameters. In this profile, we mainly configure port VLAN. Multicast VLAN strip is also configured here if necessary. For HGU, configure VEIP1 transparent mode. For SFU, configure VLAN mode for Ethernet port according to actual application scenario. At last, bind the profiles to ONU. First, click Config button of the ONU in Profile Bind table. Second, select the line profile, service profile, or other profiles. Third, click Submit button to finish binding profile. That's all for PON profile configuration. There are other profiles, using them according to different scenarios. Secondly, for EPON profile configuration, it's much simpler. Specify a profile ID and add a service profile first. For SFU, need to fill in the LAN account and then configure LAN. For HGU, just configure one for the service. Wi-Fi and LAN DHCP can be configured according to actual application scenario. For any change of the profile, you need to commit it to take effect the settings. For IPTV service and VoIP profile, it's the same way to configure. After that, bind the profiles to ONU. Till now, service configuration is complete. All above are the basic operations and configuration of VSOL PON products. Upon completion of this course, I hope you're able to know how to use VSOL PON products. Any other questions or technical problems, please contact our support team. That's all for this course. Thank you for your attention and listening.